The T-34 hit the lip at full speed. 30 tons of Soviet steel pitched nose first into the black void. The driver never saw it coming. Behind him, an entire tank company vanished into the earth, one by one, like dominoes made of metal and flesh. The anti-tank ditch yawned 15 feet deep, 15 feet of absolute death. Their own engineers had carved this grave weeks ago. Now they were filling it with their own tanks. The date was July 12th, 1943. The place was Prokhorovka, and the Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army had just launched the largest tank assault in military history directly into an obstacle it had built itself. This is the story of a ditch nobody remembered, a phone call nobody wanted to receive, and a sergeant who broke every rule in the book and became a legend because of it. General Pavel Rotmistrov had spent 48 hours before the battle obsessing over German Tiger positions. His intelligence officers briefed him on Ferdinand tank destroyers. They showed him aerial photographs of German defensive lines. They told him where the enemy was strong and where they were weak. What nobody told him, what nobody bothered to update on the operational maps, was that 3 weeks earlier, Soviet engineers had dug a massive anti-tank obstacle directly across the line of advance. The ditch had been constructed during the first week of July, when Soviet intelligence suggested the Germans might push from the southwest. Standard defensive preparation. 15 feet deep, 60 feet wide in some sections. Steel-reinforced concrete at the base. The engineers marked it on their maps. They filed their reports. Then the tactical situation shifted. The Germans were advancing from the northeast instead. The ditch became irrelevant to the new defensive plan. But nobody thought to mark it on the attack maps. So when Rotmistrov stood before his brigade commanders the night before the assault and said, "We will strike like lightning. Speed is everything. The Tigers cannot traverse fast enough to engage multiple targets," he was describing a battlefield that no longer existed. The ground he was sending 800 tanks across contained a 15-foot concrete grave that everyone had forgotten about. The brigade commanders nodded. They'd heard this before: mass, speed, shock. The Soviet answer to German technology. More tanks than the enemy had shells. More men than the enemy had bullets. It had worked at Moscow. It had worked at Stalingrad. It would work here. Nobody mentioned the ditch. At 8:30 on July 12th, the earth shook. Rotmistrov's voice crackled across every radio net in the 5th Guards Tank Army. 3 words: Stal, 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 steel, steel, steel. The code word for the general attack. Tank commanders slammed their periscopes shut and dropped into their turrets. Drivers gunned their V-12 diesels and dumped the clutch. 600 T-34s lurched forward in a wall of steel half a kilometer wide. The sound was biblical, thunder made, of steel. The ground trembled under the weight of armored vehicles racing toward the German lines at 35 kilometers per hour. Dust clouds rose like plagues. The stench of cordite and hot diesel filled the summer air. For exactly 4 minutes, it worked. Then the lead tanks hit the ditch. The first T-34 launched over the edge like a 40-ton projectile. The driver had enough time to register the black void opening beneath him before 35 tons of Soviet engineering slammed into the bottom of a concrete pit. The impact shattered his spine. His radio operator's skull cracked against the turret wall. The tank's turret twisted 90 degrees. The gun barrel bent like a pretzel. The second tank slammed into the first. The third tried to brake and slid sideways down the slope, presenting its flank to every German gun within range. Behind them, the entire second wave had no time to stop, no time to turn. Physics doesn't respect tactical doctrine. 30 tons moving at 35 kilometers per hour doesn't stop on command. They plowed into the ditch in sequence, metal screaming against metal, tracks snapping, fuel lines rupturing. Within 10 minutes, the bottom of the Soviet anti-tank trap was carpeted with Soviet tanks. Tank commander Lieutenant Alexei Petrov was fourth in line when the charge began. He watched the lead tank disappear over what he thought was a small ridge, then the second, then the third. When he crested the same rise, he saw them. 3 smoking hulks at the bottom of a pit, turrets twisted, guns pointing at empty sky. He yanked the steering levers hard left. Too late. The right track caught the edge, and his 30-ton machine pivoted like a compass needle, down into the hole. The impact drove his spine up through his skull. His loader's face went into the breech of the main gun. Behind him, more tanks piled into the same hole. Some tried to brake. Track tension broke. Fuel tanks ruptured and caught fire. Men screamed inside. Sealed compartments as ammunition cooked off. The ditch became a furnace. From the German positions 800 meters away, it looked like divine intervention. Hundreds of enemy tanks charging straight into a hole they'd dug themselves. Wehrmacht gunners couldn't believe what they were seeing. Obergefreiter Hans Müller, hull gunner in a Panzer IV, described it years later to his son. They just kept coming, tank after tank, straight into the hole they dug themselves, like lemmings with cannons. The German response was almost clinical. Panzer IV commanders with their long-barreled 75mm guns methodically worked down the line of trapped Soviet armor. T-34s stuck at the bottom of a concrete pit, turrets barely above ground level, tracks spinning uselessly against vertical walls. One shot, one kill, move to the next. They didn't even need to estimate range. The targets weren't moving. Hauptmann Wolfgang Schneider, commanding a Panzer IV company, watched through his periscope as the carnage unfolded. "They're driving into a pit," he radioed his loader. "My God, they're actually driving into a pit." His loader, a 19-year-old from Bavaria, stood in the hatch watching. He stopped counting at 40 tanks. There were too many to count. General Rotmistrov watched from his command post as his massed armor, 600 tanks strong, transformed into a junkyard in 30 seconds. His radio crackled with confused reports. Tank commanders screaming coordinates that made no sense. Platoon leaders asking for orders that couldn't fix this disaster. The carefully planned assault had become a rescue operation. The tanks that missed the ditch weren't much better off. They milled around the edges like cattle at a waterhole. Perfect targets. German anti-tank guns began picking them off one by one, methodical, professional, like shooting fish in a barrel. Soviet doctrine had failed at its first obstacle, literally. But this story isn't only about failure, it's also about a 20-year-old German sergeant who understood something that his superiors didn't. Franz Stagger commanded Tiger 1331 in the 13th Company, 1st SS Panzer Regiment. He was not supposed to break formation. He was not supposed to think for himself. He was supposed to follow orders and advance with his unit in line abreast, presenting a unified front, maintaining formation integrity, and dying like a good soldier if the plan required it. At 9:15, he broke formation. The official divisional plan called for the Tigers to advance toward the railway embankment and engage Soviet armor head-on. Standard doctrine: let the enemy come to you. Engage at maximum range. Maintain position. Stagger had read the after-action reports from North Africa. He'd studied the tank battles at Gazala and Kasserine. He understood something fundamental about the Tiger One that his company commander apparently didn't. The Tiger was built for standoff engagements. Its 88mm gun could kill anything the Soviets fielded at ranges where Soviet guns couldn't touch back. The thick frontal armor could stop Soviet 76mm shells all day. Why throw away those advantages by advancing into a knife fight? His platoon leader screamed at him over the radio. Tiger 007, maintain position. Repeat, maintain position. Stagger switched to intercom. Driver, we're moving to grid 77, the high ground. His driver, Corporal Wilhelm Beck, didn't question the order. Beck had been with Stagger since Kursk began, had learned to trust the Obergefreiter's instincts over the officer's theories. The Tiger One rumbled toward the high ground while his company advanced toward the smoke. He'd hunt from the hills like a sniper with a 60-ton rifle. From his elevated position overlooking the anti-tank ditch, Stagger could watch the entire disaster unfold. Soviet tanks milling around the obstacle's edges, looking for crossing points that didn't exist. T-34 commanders standing in their turrets, trying to direct traffic through choking black smoke. German Panzer IVs methodically destroying trapped armor from 800 meters. It wasn't warfare, it was slaughter. His gunner, Obergefreiter Keller, was the best in the battalion. A farm boy from Bavaria who could put a tungsten core through a keyhole at 1,000 meters. Steady hands and ice water for blood. Target T-34, his 11 o'clock, 800 meters, Stagger called. Keller's eye found the gun sight. Through the smoke, he could make out the Soviet tank's turret. Distinctive sloped armor. The 76mm gun pointed away from them, engaging something else. Identified, Keller replied. Fire when ready. The 88mm gun roared. Recoil rocked the 60-ton Tiger like a boat in rough seas. Cordite smoke filled the fighting compartment. The spent shell case clanged against the turret wall. 800 meters downrange, the T-34 stopped moving. Forever. That was kill number 1. Stagger had 21 to go. 10 o'clock hours, the battlefield had transformed into something out of a nightmare. Black smoke from burning diesel fuel and exploding ammunition hung over the steppe like a toxic cloud. Visibility dropped to less than 50 meters in some sectors. The summer sun disappeared entirely. Tank crews fought blind battles against invisible enemies. Muzzle flashes became the only reliable method of target detection. Soviet radio discipline collapsed completely. Where are they? Can't see targets. Falling back. No retreat without orders. Then send orders. Can't reach command. Unit cohesion collapsed under the weight of simultaneous transmissions. Company commanders couldn't find their platoons. Platoon leaders couldn't find their tanks. Stagger's crew developed their own targeting system. Soviet tank engines ran at higher RPMs than German power plants. In the smoke, experienced crews could identify enemy tanks by sound alone. His gunner learned to traverse on engine noise. Driver could position for shots based purely on acoustic signatures. Target bearing 090, the loader would whisper. T-34, moving left to right. The gunner would traverse. The gun would fire. Another kill. But here's where Stagger's genius revealed itself. He abandoned every principle of German gunnery training. No range estimation, no wind calculation, no careful sight picture. Just point the 88mm gun at movement in the smoke and pull the trigger. Not aimed shooting, he muttered into his throat microphone. Just firing at movement in the smoke. Every rule his instructors had taught him said this was wrong. German doctrine emphasized deliberate, aimed fire. Identify the target, estimate the range, calculate the lead angle, fire for effect. But doctrine assumes you can see what you're shooting at. Here, in this black furnace, doctrine was a death sentence. By 11 o'clock, Stagger had killed 14 Soviet tanks without taking a single hit. His Tiger was invisible, in a terrain fold that didn't appear on any tactical map. Soviet crews were scanning for him everywhere except where he actually was. The psychological effect was devastating. Soviet tank crews had been briefed on Tiger capabilities before the battle. Tigers were invincible. Tigers could kill at 2,000 meters. Tigers were everywhere. None of it was entirely true, but truth doesn't matter when fear is doing the talking. Soviet intelligence would later report an entire Tiger battalion at Prokhorovka. In reality, there were 15 operational Tigers in the entire engagement, 15 tanks in a battle involving over 1,000 armored vehicles, but those 15 tanks might as well have been 15 dragons. Every long-barreled German vehicle became a Tiger in the smoke and confusion. Up-armored Panzer IVs with their 75mm guns looked like Tigers at 300 meters. Stu-G3's assault guns, dug into defensive positions, were reported as Tigers by panicked Soviet observers. The fear multiplied faster than the actual casualties. Tank Commander Senior Lieutenant Viktor Bryukov described it in his debrief. "We could see the muzzle flashes, could see our comrades dying, but the fascist Tigers were invisible, like shooting at something that lives inside the hill." Soviet tank crews, unable to engage German armor at effective range, started using their tanks as battering rams, not as a last resort, as a deliberate tactic. Close the distance at maximum speed and ram the German tank before it could fire. The mathematics were horrible but simple. Trade 3 T-34s for 1 Tiger, and the Soviets still came out ahead. The Red Army could replace tanks faster than the Wehrmacht could replace crews. Senior Lieutenant Nikolai Skripko knew his T-34 couldn't win a gunnery duel with a Tiger. The 76mm gun couldn't penetrate Tiger frontal armor at any practical combat range. The Tiger's 88mm gun could kill his tank at any range on the battlefield. Math was everything in tank, combat, and the math was all German, so Skripko chose ramming speed. His driver understood without orders. The V12 diesel roared to maximum RPM. The T-34 leapt forward like a 30-ton artillery shell. 50 kilometers per hour, 60. Through his periscope, Skripko could see a Tiger's massive gun barrel traversing toward him. The muzzle looked like a tunnel. Any second now, that 88mm round would turn his tank into scrap metal and his crew into paste. The Tiger fired at 200 meters. The German gunner had aimed too high. Panic shot. The shell screamed past overhead. 50 meters, 20, 10. The T-34 hit the Tiger's left track at full speed. The collision threw both crews against their armor plating with enough force to crack ribs. The Tiger's track snapped and wrapped around the drive sprocket. The massive tank lurched sideways and ground to a halt. Both crews bailed out into the smoke. The T-34 was destroyed. The Tiger was immobilized. In the arithmetic of Prokhorovka, that counted as a Soviet victory. Stagger watched the ramming attack from 400 meters away. His radio was full of German units reporting contact with suicidal Soviet charges. Panzer commanders were backing away from close-range engagements. The specter of 30-ton suicide bombs had changed the tactical calculus overnight. For Stagger, it just meant more targets in straight lines. By noon, visibility was near zero. Tank crews navigated by dead reckoning and prayer. Radio communications fragmented under the weight of desperate transmissions. Unit identification became impossible. Soviet T-34 crews, unable to distinguish friend from foe in the smoke, fired at anything with a long gun barrel. German crews did the same. Friendly fire casualties mounted on both sides. Not aimed shooting, Stagger kept muttering, just firing at movement. His 22nd kill came at 10:45. A T-34 that materialized out of the smoke like a metal ghost, its engine screaming at maximum throttle, charging his position at 50 kilometers per hour. His gunner fired at 200 meters. The armor-piercing round took the Soviet tank in the engine compartment. The diesel fuel exploded instantly. The crew had seconds to get out. They didn't make it. By 1400 hours, Stagger's Tiger was down to 8 rounds of ammunition. The engine was running hot from constant maneuvering. His loader, Private Johann Krebs, was working by muscle memory alone, exhausted beyond rational thought. But they were alive. In tank combat, that made them extraordinarily lucky. Driver, advance slowly. We're hunting. His radio crackled with orders to return to the divisional assembly point. Stagger switched it off. 22 confirmed kills. His gunner shot out, his loader bleeding from shrapnel cuts, his driver half-deaf from the gun blast. But still hunting, still invisible in the smoke. The Tiger, designed as a precision killing instrument, had become something else entirely. A 40-ton predator operating on instinct and improvisation in a battlefield where all the rules had burned away with the diesel fuel. As evening fell on July 12th, the valley floor was carpeted with burning armor. Over 400 Soviet tanks had been destroyed or damaged. German losses were significant but far lighter. More importantly, the German summer offensive, Operation Citadel, had been permanently blunted. The Soviet counterattack at Prokhorovka had failed to break through the German lines, but the German advance had also stalled. Neither side had achieved its objectives. Both sides had bled catastrophically. General Rotmistrov stood in his command bunker, surrounded by maps covered in red symbols. Each symbol represented destroyed units, shattered formations, dead men. 500 tanks reduced to burning scrap metal in 14 hours of fighting. His aide handed him reports he couldn't bear to read. 3,000 men dead or missing. Entire corps, rendered combat ineffective. The largest armored assault in history had turned into the largest armored disaster. At 23:47 Moscow time, the secure telephone line crackled to life. Rotmistrov recognized the voice immediately, low, deliberate, each word carefully enunciated. Joseph Stalin didn't waste time on pleasantries. Comrade General, explain to me how you managed to lose 400 tanks in a single afternoon. Rotmistrov had been rehearsing this conversation for 7 hours. He'd prepared his explanations, practiced his responses, assembled casualty reports, ammunition expenditure summaries, terrain analyses, all the paperwork that turns catastrophe into bureaucracy. Comrade Stalin, the enemy resistance was stronger than anticipated. The German Tigers were positioned in defensive formations with excellent fields of fire. Our intelligence underestimated their tank destroyer numbers. The Tigers! Stalin's voice carried the hint of a Georgian accent, the one that appeared when he was considering executions. How many Tigers did German intelligence report in this sector? 15 operational Tigers, Comrade Stalin, plus approximately 40 Panzer IVs and 30 assault guns. And you attacked with 800 tanks. Yes, Comrade Stalin. The silence stretched for 30 seconds. Rotmistrov could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the distant rumble of artillery, could feel the stares of his staff officers, every man in the room understanding exactly what was at stake. 800 against 15, Stalin said finally. And you lost 500. Explain the mathematics, Comrade General. There was no good explanation for the mathematics. The anti-tank ditch had been an oversight. The smoke had degraded Soviet tactical coordination. German gunnery had been more effective than predicted. All true. All irrelevant when Stalin was asking questions. Rotmistrov tried anyway. Comrade Stalin, the enemy employed new defensive tactics. The tank destroyer positions were more numerous than aerial reconnaissance indicated. The terrain channeled our armor into There is also the matter of the anti-tank ditch, Comrade General. Rotmistrov's blood turned to ice water. Someone had reported the ditch, probably one of the political officers attached to his units. The party always had eyes and ears everywhere, and those eyes and ears had been watching Soviet tanks charge into Soviet engineering for 14 hours. Comrade Stalin, the ditch was constructed weeks ago when we anticipated a German advance from the southwest. The maps were not updated before the attack. The maps were not updated. Stalin repeated it slowly, tasting each word. Your own engineers constructed an anti-tank obstacle directly across your line of advance. Your own staff officers marked it on their maps, yet somehow you forgot about it, and then you sent 500 tanks to fill it with their wreckage. Silence on the line. Rotmistrov could hear papers shuffling in Moscow. Stalin was reading something. The preliminary casualty reports, probably. The ones that had reached Moscow 6 hours ago and had undoubtedly been supplemented by political officer reports that painted the complete picture of disaster. I am particularly interested in your decision-making process regarding the initial assault, Stalin continued. The tactical intelligence available to you, the reconnaissance conducted before the attack, whether proper Soviet procedures were followed, translation, find someone else to blame, produce evidence of sabotage or incompetence among subordinates, demonstrate that failure resulted from individual weakness rather than systemic problems. Stalin didn't tolerate systematic failures. They implied flaws in the system itself. Comrade Stalin, I take full responsibility for today's losses. The plan was mine. The execution was mine. Responsibility. A note of dark amusement. Yes, Comrade General. Responsibility will be assigned. A commission is being dispatched to investigate your conduct of this operation. The word commission meant NKVD investigators, political officers with arrest warrants, the kind of inquiry that ended with confessions and executions. Rotmistrov had seen other generals disappear into Moscow's basement interrogation rooms. Good commanders, loyal party members, men who had made smaller mistakes than losing 500 tanks in a single day. I am also told that a young lieutenant warned you about the ditch during the planning conference, that you dismissed his concerns, called them defeatist thinking. Rotmistrov closed his eyes. Lieutenant Volkov, a 23-year-old platoon leader who'd actually walked the ground, who'd measured the ditch and calculated the angles of approach, who'd marked it on his own map and brought it to the pre-battle briefing, who'd been told by Rotmistrov's chief of staff that speed was the answer to all-terrain obstacles, and that defeatist reconnaissance was the enemy of Soviet offensive spirit. Lieutenant Volkov was dead, killed leading his tanks across the terrain he'd predicted would be a death trap. There will be an investigation, Comrade General. Marshal Vasilevsky will chair the commission. You will cooperate fully with their inquiry. Stalin's tone was matter-of-fact now, bureaucratic, the tone of a man deciding fates between dinner and sleep. You will remain in command pending their conclusions. Do not interpret this as forgiveness. Interpret this as a temporary reprieve. The line went dead without ceremony. Rotmistrov set the telephone down with shaking hands. Through the command bunker's windows, he could see fires still burning across the valley. Funeral pyres for hundreds of Soviet tank crews who had charged into hell because someone forgot to tell them where the holes were. Chief of the General Staff, Alexander Vasilevsky, would intervene the following morning. The strategic situation was too critical to waste experienced tank commanders on show trials. Rotmistrov would keep his command and his life. But careers ended quietly. Subordinate officers disappeared into penal battalions. The price of failure was distributed downward through the ranks until it reached men who couldn't appeal to Moscow. Meanwhile, 20-year-old Franz Stagger was receiving the Knight's Cross from his regimental commander. His company commander was taking credit for the tactical innovations. His divisional commander was claiming the independent maneuvering had been part of a carefully planned German strategy. The NCO who broke formation and improvised spray and pray gunnery became a poster boy for German precision and tactical superiority. The irony was complete. Soviet doctrine had failed catastrophically, while German improvisation succeeded brilliantly. But the official histories would record Prokhorovka as a Soviet victory because the German offensive had been stopped. The largest tank battle in history became a legend of Soviet armored power. The anti-tank ditch became a footnote. The midnight phone call never happened in any official account. Lieutenant Volkov's warning at the planning conference was never recorded. The truth waited in the soil. 40 years later, a Western researcher walked across the fields near Prokhorovka with a metal detector and a research permit. The anti-tank ditch was still visible as a depression in the steppe, partially filled by decades of erosion but still unmistakable from above. Farmers had been plowing up fragments for decades. Tank tracks, pieces of armor plate, shell fragments, personal effects. The battlefield was a museum without walls. Near the coordinates of the forgotten ditch, the researcher's metal detector chimed. He knelt in the dirt and dug out a piece of T-34 track. Steel links welded together by combat stress and 40 years of Russian weather. The metal was pitted with corrosion and stained with oil that had never quite washed away. On one link, barely visible beneath the oxidation, was a small stamped marking. Factory Production Code, Summer 1943. At Sheremetyevo Airport, the Russian border guard examined his luggage with professional thoroughness. Academic papers, camera equipment, maps, everything normal for a foreign researcher. Then the track fragment. "What is this?" "Part of a tractor," the researcher replied. "Old farm equipment. I'm studying agricultural development during the wartime period." The guard turned the fragment over in his hands. Heavy steel, obvious military origin. The blast scoring and deformation that only came from high explosive proximity. He studied the researcher's face for 10 seconds that felt like 10 minutes. Then he shrugged. "Da, tractor." He handed it back without interest. The researcher walked through customs carrying physical evidence of the Eastern Front's most brutal tactical disaster. A piece of Soviet tank track, misidentified as agricultural equipment, smuggled out of the country that had spent 40 years hiding the truth about its greatest armored defeat. The irony was perfect. A T-34 track disguised as tractor parts. Soviet military hardware rebranded as civilian machinery. The same kind of bureaucratic fiction that had turned Prokhorovka's tactical catastrophe into official victory. Truth hidden beneath acceptable narrative. The track fragment sits in a university office now. A paperweight that starts arguments about Soviet tactics and German improvisation. A piece of metal that weighs more than it should because it carries the memory of July 12th, 1943 inside it. The carbon scoring from high explosive rounds. The stress fractures from ramming impacts. The molecular changes from temperatures that only occur when ammunition cooks off in an enclosed space. It remembers what the official histories forgot. It remembers Rotmistrov screaming, "Stal, Stal, Stal," into a radio net, while his tanks drove into their own ditch. It remembers Stagger abandoning every rule he'd been taught and killing 22 Soviet tanks by firing at shadows in the smoke. It remembers Soviet crews turning their T-34s into guided missiles because their doctrine had failed and their guns were useless, and ramming speed was all they had left. It remembers Lieutenant Volkov, who saw the ditch on a map and tried to warn his commanders and died for his trouble. Most of all, it remembers the gap between what the map said and what the ground actually was, the 15 feet of empty air that swallowed an armored army whole, the ditch that Soviet engineers built and Soviet commanders forgot and Soviet tank crews died in. Prokhorovka was never about grand strategy or tactical brilliance. It was about young men in steel boxes, firing at shadows in the smoke, dying because their commanders had forgotten about a ditch they dug 3 weeks earlier. Victory belongs to whoever adapts fastest when their doctrine fails. Technology without tactics is useless, and somewhere on every battlefield lies a ditch that somebody forgot to mark on the map. Franz Stagger lived to be 83. He rarely spoke about his Knight's Cross or his 22 kills. When pressed by historians, he'd only say, "We did what we had to do, nothing more." He never mentioned breaking formation, never mentioned the improvised acoustical targeting, never explained that his greatest tactical innovation was simply ignoring everything the Wehrmacht had taught him. Pavel Rotmistrov survived Stalin's investigation and lived until 1982. His official memoirs skip from July 11th to July 13th, without explanation. The ditch that swallowed his army doesn't appear in any page he wrote. The gap in those memoirs is its own kind of evidence. Some things are too honest for official histories, but the metal remembers. Every spring, the farmers around Prokhorovka plow up more fragments, shell casings, pieces of armor plate, track links. The battlefield keeps yielding its secrets to anyone willing to kneel in the dirt and look. The steel doesn't care about official versions. It only knows what actually happened. 30 tons of Soviet engineering moving at speed, 15 feet of empty air, the sound of an armored army disappearing into the earth, and somewhere above it all, a 20-year-old sergeant firing at movement in the smoke, not caring what the doctrine said, just killing everything that moved, and moving before anything could kill him back. That's the real story of Prokhorovka, not the grand clash of armored titans, not the heroic Soviet stand against German fascism. The real story is a ditch that somebody forgot to mark on a map. The real story is junior leaders saving themselves while senior commanders explain their failures to the most dangerous man in the world at midnight. The real story is that the largest tank battle in history was decided not by superior technology or brilliant planning, but by 15 feet of Soviet-engineered earth that everyone forgot about until it was too late to matter. The track fragment on that university bookshelf weighs 2 pounds and 4 ounces. 47 years after the battle, it still smells faintly of cordite when the weather is humid. History has mass. Truth rusts, but it never completely disappears, even when it's disguised as a tractor part. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.